In the late 1990s, there was a best-selling book called Tuesdays with Morrie. And in that book, the author, Mitch Albom, told the story of a college professor of his, Morrie Schwartz, who was dying from ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And one of the stories that Albom told was something that happened at a Brandeis University basketball game, the university where Morrie was a professor. Morrie was sitting probably a little too close to the student section, and when it was clear Brandeis was going to win, the students started chanting, "We're number one, we're number one." We've all heard it. But Morrie, in the middle of the cheer, stood up and turned around and faced the students, and he yelled, "What's wrong with being number two?" The crowd fell silent. Buzzkill, right? The party was over. Did he win them over? No, probably not. They probably thought, who is this crazy old man? He just confused them because everybody wants to be number one. We all want to be number one, right? We all want to be great. Everyone wants to support the winner. If you didn't know, it's election season. How many of us are hoping our candidate comes in last? Winning, chasing greatness, it's the American way. If you're not first, you're last. If you're not the lead dog, the view never changes. And then we have today's gospel, the disciples traveling with Jesus, talking about who's the greatest. You know, lots of things in Jesus' time were very different than they are today. But when it comes to how society measures greatness, very little has changed. Wealth, power, fame, status, talent. Those are the measures we use. And we've done an amazing job of passing all those measurement skills down generation after generation after generation. And so it's only natural that Jesus' followers would have been asking, who's the greatest? Who's number one among us? But Jesus turned the concept of greatness on its head. If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last and the servant of all. What does that mean? Was he telling the disciples that they shouldn't chase greatness? Was he telling them they need to try and lose? No. He was telling them you need to rethink greatness. How did he do that? He took a child and he put it in the middle of them. And he put his arms around the child and said, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me." The translation we read uses the word receives, whoever receives one child. Some translation use the word accept, and some use the word embrace. The analogy of the child, Jesus used it so much in his ministry in lots of different ways. In this instance, he put his arm around the child and told the disciples, if you want to be great, you receive this child. Who is the child? Who is the child? Well, in Jesus' time, the child was the most vulnerable member of society. 2,000 years ago, the child had nothing, no rights, no voice, no status, no legal protection. This child Jesus placed in the middle of a bunch of adults was the ultimate symbol of vulnerability, powerlessness, dependency. And what did Jesus do? He wrapped his arms around the child. He protected the child. he accepted the child. And he told the disciples, if you want to be great, you need to do the same. Greatness has nothing to do with how much wealth we accumulate or how much fame we achieve or how much power we hold. Greatness has everything to do with using whatever God has given us, money, power, education, fame, but using whatever God has given us to love and care for those who most need it. Not necessarily those who we think most deserve it, not necessarily those who we think are worthy of it, but for those who most need it. That is the only measure of greatness. And Jesus calls all of us to be great. So in 2024, who are the children in our midst? Who is it we're called to accept? Who is it we're called to embrace if we want to be great? For one, it's still the children. In Louisville, over 17% of children suffer from food insecurity. Those are the children in our midst. Are we really willing to embrace them, to accept them? Another group, the poor. 16% of Louisvillians live in poverty. Last year, more than 12,000 people in Louisville alone sought homeless services. And on any given night, more than 600 people in our own community sleep outside, right here, right now. The poor, the homeless, they are the children in our midst. Are we ready to receive them? Are we ready to care for them? Another group, immigrants. Every poll conducted in the last year evidences a horrible spike in anti-immigrant sentiment. Ask Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, how it feels to be an immigrant in the United States this week. Immigrants are the children in our midst. Are we ready to receive them? Are we ready to embrace them? Are we up for being great? Next week here at Epiphany, we're going to have a ministry fair. And there is not a parish in the Archdiocese of Louisville that offers more opportunities than Epiphany to serve those who most need it. So next week, take a few minutes after Mass or before Mass and find a way where you can serve the children in our midst. A wonderful opportunity to serve the children in our midst is an opportunity that the disciples never had. We get to vote. Greatness is not about supporting the candidate who best serves our selfish interests. Greatness is about supporting the candidate who best serves the interests of the children in our midst, the poor, the immigrants, the marginalized. Greatness isn't about supporting the candidate who at best helps us pad our pocketbooks. Greatness is about supporting the candidate who best supports those who have no pocketbooks to speak of, the children in our midst. Greatness, perhaps most of all, is about the example we set when we live our everyday lives. My personal favorite example of greatness comes from my own mom, who I think late in life achieved greatness. As I mentioned before, I grew up in Western Kentucky, Mayfield, a very small, very rural Western Kentucky town. And like lots of small towns and like lots of places in America over the past 25 years, it's seen a great influx of immigrants. And just like today, they weren't always well received or well treated. when our kids were young and we'd go to visit her, we always went to her favorite restaurant, a walk-up drive-in with the best burgers and milkshakes. It was a highlight of our visit. Nostalgic for me, a special treat, a taste of small-town life for our kids. When my mom was 81 or 82 years old and we were there for the weekend, the time came to get dinner, we were all ready to go. And she said, "Oh, we're not going there. I can't go there anymore." "What? We always go there. It's our favorite place. Why can't we go?" And she said, "A few weeks ago, I was in there waiting to order, and there was a Hispanic man a few people in front of me. He couldn't speak clear English, and the lady taking his order was so rude to him. Other customers got on board, and they got frustrated with him too, and eventually the worker told the man that she'd take his order when he'd learned to speak English. And she moved on to the next customer, just leaving him standing there. My mom said, "I waited in line, but when it was my turn, I didn't order any food, but I gave them a piece of my mind." In my family, giving someone a piece of your mind is code for, "I probably said some things I shouldn't have. I may have been a little too direct." And then she left, and she said, "If that's the way you're going to treat people, I'll never be back." Even if it meant disappointing her grandkids and her son and daughter-in-law, she was doing her part to take care of the children in our midst. And on that day, my mom achieved greatness. She wasn't a superhero. She didn't preach from a soapbox. She just did her small part to give voice to the voiceless. And it impacted me, and it impacted her grandchildren. And maybe it impacted the other people who were standing around that day. But that's not even the point. The point is, she accepted Jesus' challenge to receive the children in our midst. Maury Schwartz, when he shouted, "What's wrong with being number two?" was on to something. Greatness isn't about being first. It's about receiving and accepting those who are last. It's not making our voice the loudest. It's about giving our voice to lift up the voiceless. Jesus taught us that's how we achieve greatness. That's our challenge. Am I up for accepting that challenge? Are you?